our next speaker, I'm going to bring him in right into our studio. Hello, Aaron. Welcome.
Hey there, good to be with you.
Hi, yes, likewise. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to introduce you, just briefly read your bio. So, Aaron Abke is a Colorado-based spiritual teacher who specializes in non-duality and metaphysics, teaching from the texts such as The Law of One and A Course in Miracles. So, he was born and raised as a pastor's son in Silicon Valley of California. He desired to work in church ministry like his father and went to college at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, graduating with a bachelor's degree in music and theology. He spent 1 year working as a full-time worship pastor at a church in San Jose until eventually at 23 he felt called to leave his religion and pursue a deeper and more authentic spirituality at 27 years old. Aaron, it is such a pleasure to have you. You're from right here, the Bay Area. Are you here? Are you in the Bay Area now?
No, my family still is, but yeah, that's where I was born and raised.
Very cool. Wonderful. Well, Aaron, we will let you get started. I'll leave it to you.
All right, well, we'll get rocking and rolling. So today I'm going to talk about a concept from the Law of One. Essentially, it's going to be over the science of reincarnation. And more specifically, we're going to talk about one of the pinnacle teachings of the Law of One, which is called the 7 densities of consciousness, which is basically the blueprint that the soul follows on its evolutionary journey. So if you're not familiar with the Law of One, this is going to be a very brief overview of what the Law of One teaches in the process of reincarnation. Some of the concepts will definitely be new, but I have slides and everything to help us kind of simplify everything. But I highly recommend you read the Law of One if it piques your interest at all, because I'm a Law of One teacher, so I'm a bit biased, but I think it's just the most profound spiritual text that one can ever read. And so there's so much that it offers us for our spiritual growth. And one of those topics, obviously, being how the process of reincarnation works. So when we talk about reincarnation, in typical spiritual circles, there's a lot of, misunderstanding or just conceptual ideas that don't actually map onto the process. Like, how does the soul actually choose a reincarnation? Can a soul go backwards and become an animal again after it's become a human? And so these are some important questions that the Law of One really gives us good answers for. And what I really love about the Law of One is that it takes a lot of spiritual concepts, especially reincarnation, out of the realm of the esoteric or the woo-woo maybe, and really makes it a scientific framework that we can understand and relate to. So some of the questions that we'll answer is there a basic blueprint that every soul follows for reincarnation? How does a soul choose each lifetime? And what factors influence or affect a soul's reincarnation? And so we get into topics of karma and things like that. So let's talk about what that is. Now, I touched on the 7 densities, so let's begin with what is a density. The famous Nikola Tesla quote, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." So a density is essentially that. It is the rate vibration of the photon, the particle of light. So if you imagine, if a photon is vibrating 100 times a second versus 1,000,000 times a second, the photon that vibrates at 1,000,000 times per second is going to be a lot more dense with light than the 100 times per second. So the faster the photon vibrates, the more light is going to be there. The more light that is there, the more information is there. The more information is there, the more ability that consciousness has to express itself. And so a couple of corollaries to the 7 densities would be the 7 notes on the musical scale and the 7 colors of the color wheel. Now, the number 7 is a very archetypal number in the structure or fabric of the universe, right? So Ra actually explains the densities like the colors of the color wheel. And we know that to also correlate with the 7 chakras. Each of the 7 densities correlates to one of the 7 chakras or colors, which is what we're going to get into in a second. And another really good way to look at the densities is like the notes of a musical scale. So if you play piano, this will be a really easy analogy to see. if you start with the middle C and you go up each note, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, B is the 7th note. And when you hit the next C note, the 8th note, that is actually the first note of the next octave, right? And so Ra says that this is actually how the universe works. The universe is broken up into these 7 densities of consciousness. And once the universe completes the cycle of 7 densities and graduates to the 8th density, that actually is the beginning of a new universe or octave of experience. And so for that reason, in the Law of One, Ra actually refers to universes as octaves. So here we go. An octave of experience is basically what the universe is. So here's where we see how the 7 densities of consciousness correlate to the 7 energy centers. Now, what's really cool about Law of One is the way it shows, again, kind of in scientific fashion, that each one of us is a microcosm of the macrocosm. Each one of us is a universe in and of ourselves. And this is spoken of in many spiritual and ancient wisdom teachings, but we can actually see what that means by looking at the chakras. So you can almost look at the densities as like the chakras of the universe. So each chakra of the universe correlates directly to one of our 7 chakras. And these are actually the 7 sort of stages that a soul has to move through in its reincarnation process. And so we're going to go through each one of these densities and chakras to kind of show you how they correlate and what each one of them represents. Now, one of the other interesting concepts in the Law of One is the mind-body-spirit complex. Ra does not refer to humans as people or humans, but they will always choose the term mind-body-spirit complex because, from their level of understanding, a human is actually a complex of a mind and a body and a spirit. And so I just kind of made this chart to give us a representation of how this works. If you look to the far left, you have the one self or the absolute or the one creator, God, whatever name you'd like to use for it. And that one creator or self splits itself off into infinite different fragments, or we could call that spirits. And so each one of those individual fragments or spirits then projects itself into a soul or mind, which is the 7 energy centers of the Kundalini. And then that mind has to project itself into a body. So in order for the source to have any experience in space-time, it has to kind of do it this way, project itself as a spirit into a soul, into a body. And so if we start from the right side of the chart, this is where the sort of the return movement back to the source begins. We incarnate here as inside of a body or an ego, and we learn and grow through the challenges of life and expand our vibration to graduate up each level of density until eventually merging back with the source. So the body is that which dies, the soul is that which reincarnates, the spirit is that which witnesses every reincarnation. And then, of course, the absolute self, it exists eternally. It was never born, it never dies, it never experiences anything but itself. So let's talk about these 7 densities. So the first density of consciousness, the Law of One teaches, is the density of pure beingness. So this is when Earth spent, about 2 billion years just as the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space or prana. And so these 5 elements interact with one another, lava, water, wind, fire, air, until eventually microbial life and mineral life is evolved. So as consciousness in that state of pure being, it spends, again, at least on our planet, we know, first density lasted about 2 billion years before any kind of intelligent life evolved. And so this is when consciousness is basically learning how to exist in space and time. So there's not a lot of complexity to the first density. And of course, the first density would correlate to the first chakra, which is the red ray or root chakra. And I'm going to give you guys just a brief overview of what the kind of energies that each chakra represents. This isn't going to be very in-depth, but just to give you an example, the red ray chakra of our nature represents our basic survival and sexuality. So the root chakra is going to be blocked by things such as fear, because fear is kind of a survival mechanism. Any shame or distortions around sexuality will block the red ray. Fear of safety or security, and of course, physical and sexual traumas, all of these will create vibrational distortions in the root chakra that need to be healed and balanced through faith and trust in the source, in life, and acceptance of self. So the next density, as I mentioned, is the second density, where after consciousness has spent a couple billion years as the 5 elements, eventually microbial life forms, and then plant life and insect life, and all the way up through animals represents the second density of consciousness. And the second density correlates to the orange ray or sacral chakra. Now, the body that a second density body is a chemical / atomic body, whereas the first density body was purely an atomic body, obviously the 5 elements. So chemicals come into the second density to create or to allow for growth and movement. So basically any biological life that has growth or movement would be a second density life form. And so at least again on our planet, we know that the second density lasted also about 2 billion years, give or take. And this is where consciousness learns awareness through growth and movement and interaction with the environment. So the sacral chakra or orange ray represents our relationship to ourself. So this chakra is going to be blocked by emotional traumas, self-judgments, any desire to possess or control somebody, or to be possessed or to be controlled by someone would be a sacral chakra blockage. And addictions would also be another example of orange ray blockages. So these are all just different relationship to self issues or distortions. And so the way that you would unblock this chakra is learning basic self-love and self-forgiveness. So then we come to the third density of consciousness, which is where humans belong. So this is the density of self-awareness and something that the law of one calls the choosing between the positive and the negative polarity. So third density obviously correlates to the yellow ray or solar plexus chakra. This is a purely chemical body. So the chemical body graduates a bit more in third density so that the human brain can grow larger, more neural capacity is evolved so that consciousness can sort of, almost if you imagine consciousness flips in on itself and becomes an object to itself. It understands I exist or I am. And this is where the human ego evolves in the third density. So the third density is kind of like the wild card in the 7 densities, because a lot of really important and pivotal things happen for the soul's evolution in third density. And the most important thing that happens is the choosing between the positive and the negative polarity. So this is why the third density is the shortest of the 7, and it is by far the most intense in terms of like the suffering, the challenges, and the catalysts available in third density. Second density, you might say, is a harder density because, it's pure animal survival, kill or be killed. But the caveat is that animals don't have the level of self-awareness that a human being has. Animals can't conceptualize their existence in the way that humans can, so they can't fantasize about their past or their future like a human can. They can't suffer from their thoughts like a human can. So that's what really creates all of the challenges of third density, is that we are self-aware. We know we exist, and so we can wrestle with the complexities of that existence. And that's actually the whole point of third density. So this is one of the teachings in the law of one that really gives people a lot of relief and hope, because it kind of gives you this recognition that like, okay, it's supposed to be like this. Like nothing has gone wrong here. The soul is, moves through this density in a very rapid fashion, at least by comparison to the others. And the point is that the source wants every soul to have an organic, authentic opportunity to decide, do I want to be positively polarized or negatively polarized? And the decision that the soul makes between those two polarities will basically determine the path it follows the rest of its evolutionary journey. So for that reason, the source introduces what they call the veil of forgetting in third density, where we don't have any memory of our past lives or the fact that we're a soul on a journey or where we come from, where we go after this life. We know absolutely nothing, because knowing those things would sort of infringe on our decision between the positive and the negative. And the source wants that to be a truly organic choice. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in some coming slides, but to touch on the solar plexus chakra, or the yellow ray, this chakra represents our relationship with other selves. So it's kind of like our social survival. So the yellow ray chakra is going to be blocked by insecurities, which is kind of fear of how other people see me, right? Jealousy and pride. Again, desire to control others or be controlled by others. Manipulating truth in order to control others. The desire to be worshipped by people, or victimization, which is the belief that other people have power over me. These are all different distortions that happen in the solar plexus chakra. And so just like the other two we've mentioned so far, this can only be healed or unblocked through forgiveness of self and others, and love or acceptance of self and others. So to summarize the first three densities in a really simple way, we can say that consciousness sleeps in the rock, it dreams in the animal, and it awakens in the human. So we can see this in our own reality for absolute certain that there are different levels of consciousness between these three forms. The rock has a kind of consciousness in the fact that it exists, but it doesn't have any awareness really beyond that. An animal has awareness, but it doesn't have self-awareness. And a human sort of becomes awake in the dream and understands, I exist. And a really easy way also to see kind of how these basic distortions play out in the three chakras is you can see in these three categories how each distortion becomes a little more complex or nuanced. So every grade of consciousness allows those distortions to become more intricate. So a red ray or root chakra blockage would be like a rapist, a pedophile, or a murderer. Just someone full of toxic negative energy, taking it out in the most animalistic way possible. An orange ray blockage, however, becomes like a narcissist or a manipulator or the playboy or different kinds of mental psychosis, mental disorders and imbalances. And then when we get to the yellow ray, this is where we have things like cult leaders, corrupt politicians and military dictators, which use a lot of intellect in their manipulation compared to the other two. So now we'll get into the spiritual chakras, or the upper four densities. So the fourth density of consciousness is the density of love and understanding. So when the vibration rate of the photon is vibrating fast enough, rapidly enough, consciousness is granted the capacity to understand all is one. Like, yes, we may be in separate bodies, but we are all of one essence, one energy, one life. And so we're all in this together. That is a fourth density understanding. So the law of one explains that a fourth density body is a chemical / light body. So you can see how the body that you incarnate into matches the density level that you're in. So the higher the vibration is, more light is introduced into the body. So we don't obviously know what a fourth density body exactly looks like. So I just have, avatar here as an example. It would be something that's a little bit more translucent, a little more ephemeral in a way. because it contains more of that electromagnetic energy, and it's not purely chemical. Now, a third density body, our bodies, also have, are full of electromagnetic energy, but it's just much less compared to a fourth density body. And so the third density, as we said, is about 75,000 years in total. That's the planetary cycle. Compared to the fourth density is 30 million years. So you can kind of see what I meant a minute ago when I said that, 75,000 years is a long time in comparison to human lifetime, but compare that to 30 million years, it's like a snap of the finger. So Earth shifted into the fourth density in the year 2012. And we'll talk about at the very last slide how a planet graduates to the next density like ours did. But essentially, when 51% or more of the planetary population matches a fourth density frequency, the planet itself gets magnetized to that density level. And what that means is now Earth is hospitable for fourth density souls to incarnate here. And that's kind of the idea of what a graduation means. So as I said, consciousness in the fourth density becomes aware of oneness, and service to others becomes the primary way that a soul evolves and gains more of that charge and consciousness. And then lastly, down here I have that fourth density is where the social memory complex begins. And so I know I'm kind of going over a lot of concepts here. If you're not familiar with the law of one, it might be a bit overwhelmed, but I've mentioned Ra a few times. Ra is a social memory complex of the sixth density, and Ra is obviously the being that was channeled in the law of one. And so the idea of a social memory complex is essentially that all beings on that planet begin to share their thoughts together. All of the thoughts and memories of every person on that planet are kind of joined into one greater library. And so you actually have access in a social memory complex to all the thoughts and memories of everyone that's there. So it really reflects and creates a sense of oneness with everyone, because, the sense of individuality, once all of your memories are open to everyone and vice versa, kind of starts to dissolve a bit. Now, obviously, you're still living in your own individual body, but your consciousness has really merged with the group consciousness. And so that phenomenon begins in the fourth density. The green ray or heart chakra represents love and understanding, as we've said. So blockages in the heart chakra would be things like judging of self or others. The belief in being separate would obviously block the heart chakra. Lacking compassion and having unforgiveness are kind of obvious ones. And so the heart chakra is cleansed and balanced through knowledge of self as the creator, and then again, accepting and forgiving of self and others, and really striving to see everyone as the creator, as yourself. Is kind of the primary way to open the heart chakra. So then we get into the fifth density, which is the wisdom or light density. And this correlates to the blue ray or throat chakra. And the fifth density is when the body becomes purely light at this point. So the body is completely electromagnetic energy. And so, different accounts of ET encounters that people have had typically describe ETs as these kind of beings of light, or they might actually take on a physical form of light that looks like a human. And, ETs will do this if they're having an encounter with a human to try and, calm them down a bit or not appear as frightening to the human. But truly, a light body has no actual form. They can appear as whatever they want. And so typically the preferred method of appearance or travel is just sort of like an orb of light. And that's also kind of a common phenomenon that people describe with ETs. So in the fifth density, Ra doesn't actually say how long it lasts, but we know that fourth density is 30 million and sixth is 75 million. So the cycle of the fifth density would be somewhere between that. And the fifth density is where the soul begins to develop extremely powerful psychic abilities, the ability to travel time and space through thought alone, the ability to create objects in space through thought alone, and all these kinds of things. Fifth density is also where the soul will balance its service to others with more wisdom. So learning how to be less of a martyr, for example, and serve in a balanced way that doesn't require you to overshare or overgive of yourself while helping the other. And this is a density where in the fourth density, it's much more about the group, the soul, the collective, serving others as a group. Fifth density spends much more time in isolation, learning self-knowledge, and again, developing these really powerful psychic abilities in consciousness. So the blue ray chakra is the throat chakra, of course. It represents wisdom and authenticity. Authenticity is actually the expression of wisdom. So this chakra will be blocked by dishonesty, lack of communication, fear of self-expression, and any kind of inauthenticity. These represent basic blockages of the throat chakra. And so it's going to be opened by, again, knowledge of self, which is wisdom, and acceptance of self. Now, sixth density is where things get really interesting, because this is the density of unity and balance, which correlates to the indigo ray or third eye chakra. Now, Ra says this body is also a purely light body. The interesting difference that Ra says is that a fifth density light body will appear as a white light, whereas a sixth density light body appears more as a golden light. And they do say that the planetary cycle of sixth density is around 75 million years. So sixth density is where polarity ends. And we've been talking purely about, how the positive polarity looks. The negative polarity would take its own slideshow to teach you about. But essentially, the negative polarity, when it reaches sixth density, finds that it cannot polarize any farther. It cannot gain any more charge in consciousness. And so essentially, the negative being has to concede and reverse its polarity to the positive in order to complete or finish its evolutionary journey. So in a sense, both polarities merge into one at sixth density. And this is where the soul is required to achieve a perfect balance between love and wisdom, or the feminine and masculine polarities of the self. And the interesting part about the sixth density is that Ra says at the mid level of sixth density is when the soul becomes the higher self, or the oversoul. And this is a stage in every one of our soul's evolution that is required in order to merge back with the Creator. And this essentially happens because the soul has gained all of the polarity it possibly can gain through service to others and learning self-knowledge and love and all of these things. And it can't increase its polarity any further until it kind of ups the ante a bit, which is to essentially serve as the higher self or guide to all of its previous incarnations. So your higher self is literally you from the future, your future sixth density self, which exists right now, that has turned back in time to serve as a guide to all of its lifetimes. And so this sounds a bit nuanced, right? Because you might think, well, if I've already lived those lifetimes, I already know what happens, right? Like, how can I be a guide to myself? And that's partially true, but it's true from only one perspective, which is that you only know on the left side of the curtain, let's say, what it was like from the incarnative experience, but you don't know what it was like from the right side of the curtain, where you were choosing all of the catalysts and choosing all of the lessons that came to you in those lifetimes. So it's sort of like you get to experience both parts of the dream, right? You get to experience what it's like to be the guide and to have been guided. And this is part of how the sixth density soul advances to the seventh density. So the indigo ray chakra, or third eye chakra, represents empowerment and spiritual vision, or you can think of it as knowledge of self as the creator. So the third eye chakra is going to be blocked by unworthiness, fear of knowing yourself as the creator, lacking trust in the universe or the source, and having fear of the unknown. These are things that will block or constrict the channel of energy in the third eye chakra. And it's going to be opened by the same things as we've covered in the previous chakras: knowledge of self and love or acceptance of self. Now, the seventh density is one that we don't know much about because, Ra is only sixth density. So they actually say we don't know much about the seventh density because we haven't been there yet. But they do say a few things, which is that the seventh density is called the gateway density. They serve as guides and teachers to the higher selves of sixth density. So even the higher self has its own guide, which actually makes sense, right? If you're doing something so complex and nuanced, like serving as a guide to every lifetime you've lived, then you might have some questions yourself about how to be of service in the best possible way. And so seventh density souls are those guides and teachers. So the seventh density, or violet ray crown chakra, is where the soul has kind of 1 foot still in time and 1 foot in eternity. So we don't know what the seventh density body looks like. I mean, I imagine it's some sort of light body, but every body in space and time, like you can't incarnate into space and time without having a body. So we do know that a seventh density soul has some kind of body, but we don't know what that exactly looks like. And we also don't know how long a seventh density planetary cycle lasts. So we talked about graduation in the beginning, and I just wanted to finish the presentation by explaining this because it's a really important process to understand in why reincarnation works the way it works. So if you think about grades in school, let's say I'm in 10th grade and I have to learn algebra. I have to pass algebra in 10th grade before I can learn calculus in 11th grade. So it's similar to the way a soul progression works, in that the soul also has to learn the lessons of the following density before it can be eligible to graduate to that density. So we talked about how fourth density is the love and understanding density. So here in third density, we have to learn the lessons of love and understanding and compassion before our soul is eligible for a fourth density lifetime. And that would be the same for all of the 7 densities. You learn the lessons of the following density before you can graduate into it. So once a certain level of polarization is achieved in the energy centers, that's when the soul is eligible to graduate to the following density in its next lifetime. So, if you read about NDEs, people say they go back to the source, back to the light, and they have a life review. They see everything that they did in that lifetime, all the decisions they made, and they kind of grade themselves based on the way that they respond to watching that life review. If there's a lot of regret, if there's a lot of sadness or sorrow for the things that were done, then certainly that soul needs to go back into that same density level again to try and have another shot to pass those tests, right? Learn how to forgive, learn how to love people. And if a soul watches its life review and feels a sense of gratitude and happiness that it lived, the right way and it followed the right lessons, then the higher self may say, okay, you're eligible now for a fourth density incarnation. And so then you would at that point choose, what planet do I want to go to for my fourth density? And the caveat is, if you want to stay on the same planet, which the law of one says most souls choose that path, you choose to incarnate on that planet whenever in the future that planet is at that level. So we know that Earth just graduated into fourth density in 2012, but we're still at the very beginning stage, like the first gradient on that spectrum. And, 30 million years is a long planetary cycle. So for all intensive purposes, we're kind of still in third density because we're still working out all of that third density karma as we see in our world today. So you might say, okay, I'm going to incarnate onto planet Earth in 5,000 years from now, when it's kind of more firmly in the fourth density, because the soul wants to incarnate onto a planet that matches its vibration. So it wouldn't make sense if you're a mid fourth density soul to incarnate onto a planet that just barely started fourth density, because you've already passed all those lessons that those souls want to learn. So you need something that's a little more conducive to your learning, right? And so once, as I said earlier, once 51% or better of the planetary population are polarized to that density level, the planet itself becomes magnetized to that level of vibration. And that's basically what happened to planet Earth in the year 2012. So to close the presentation, I have a quote from Ra that really encapsulates this idea of graduating and reincarnation. And Ra is going to use a term here called the harvest, which is just another term for graduating. Being harvested or graduating is the same thing. So this comes from session 6, question 14. And Ra says, the law of one states simply that all things are one, that all beings are one. There are certain behaviors and thought forms consonant with the understanding and practice of this law. Those who, finishing a cycle of experience, demonstrate various grades of understanding of thought and action will be separated by their own choice into the vibratory distortion most comfortable to their mind-body-spirit complexes. So that's exactly what we just talked about. Thus, the illusion is created of light, or more properly, but less understandably, light love. This is in varying degrees of intensity. The spirit complex of each harvested entity moves along the line of light until the light grows too glaring, at which time the entity stops. This entity may have barely reached the third density, or may be very, very close to ending of the third density. Nevertheless, those who fall within this octave of intensifying light love then experience a major cycle during which the opportunities are many for the discovery of the distortions which are inherent in each entity, and therefore the lessening of these distortions. So I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen there. So what Ra is saying there is they use this analogy of a staircase. And a soul graduating is sort of like if you imagine walking up a staircase made of light, and each step you walk up gets a little bit bigger. And at the point where the light is so bright and glaring that you can't take another step, that's where the higher self will look at what staircase you're on. And if you're still on a third density stair, the higher self knows, okay, you need at least one more lifetime in third density before you can absorb or take in this level of light, which is the fourth density. Now, if lifetime ends and you've gotten to a fourth dense staircase, then your higher self says, all right, this soul is eligible for a fourth density lifetime. So the cool thing is that nobody loses the game. Everyone ends at the same destination. Everyone returns back to the source. But the time or the amount of lifetimes that it takes a soul to finish that journey is essentially up to you, right? How fast do you want to learn these lessons? And as Ra says, cleanse these distortions, anger, self-hatred, jealousy. These are the things that we come into lifetimes to have experiences and learn these lessons in real time, to apply the lessons of love in actual situations. That's the way that our vibration expands. So I love the law of one for this reason, because learning is great. We all love reading books. We all love watching spiritual videos. But those things in and of themselves don't allow us to polarize or grow. It's when we apply those truths we learn to our actual life experience that our soul frequency expands and we grow. And in the fourth density, there's no veil of forgetting. There's no suffering because everything is known. Your sense of self is one with the universe. So it's really the third density that all the challenges are met here, where we wrestle with the polarities of good and evil, right and wrong, and which one you gravitate towards is perfectly valid. The Creator doesn't bat an eye at the light or the darkness, but the consequences of choosing positive or negative are obviously very different. So we have a couple of minutes left, and I guess we'll use whatever time we have left for some Q&A.
Thank you so much. What an incredible presentation. Beautiful understanding of the law of one. Let's see if we have some questions. We have a question from Woke Dealer Pinkarisa, who says, is this maybe why other ETs appear in different colors? You were talking about how, they manifest themselves in light. So does that have something to do with it?
Yeah, I think that the color, like the skin color of the body, doesn't actually correlate to the density of the soul, because that would be more indicative of like the planetary environment, kind of like people who are from Africa have darker skin because there's more sunlight. People in northern hemispheres have lighter skin because there's less sunlight. ETs would be subject to those rules as well. But when it comes to purely light bodies, the answer would be yes. A white light body would be indicative of a fifth density soul. A golden light body would be a sixth density soul. So there's some truth to that.
Amazing. We have another question here from Catherine Coyle, who says, can we choose to go back down for a unique experience repeated?
Yeah, so there's like so many amazing concepts to go over in the law of one, and I left this one out just because I didn't want to overwhelm everybody with too much. But yeah, this is the concept of the star seed, or the wanderer, as the law of one calls it. Wanderer is their term for star seed, which is a soul which chooses to go back to the third density again. And so this density, third density, only one that souls choose to go back to in order to like there's greater rewards available in third density because there's that veil of forgetting. The consequences are more extreme in third density, which means if you make the right choices, you're going to polarize a lot more than you can in your native density. And souls also choose to come here to be of service to planets that are struggling. And Ross says that that's exactly what's happened on planet Earth, is that back in the 70s or 80s, as we were coming up to this graduation, souls on the other side apparently saw that our planet was kind of on this precipice of like, are we going to be positive or negative? And so souls will incarnate to bring a higher vibration to the planet to kind of help us out so that we make a positive graduation. And apparently that's exactly what happened.
Beautiful. We have another question, our last question from Carla Rios, who says, how do we go from being human, flesh, into light?
Yeah.
How do we do that, Aaron?
Great question. It happens basically by the process of evolution. So, like I said, the faster that the photon vibrates, the more density of light is available in that body. So as we progress through the fourth density, the human body will reflect this evolution more and more. And it has to match the level of the consciousness on the planet. It's a direct representative of that. So the faster we evolve in consciousness, the faster our bodies will slowly turn into a light body, which means the chemical aspect of the body is less and less necessary. And, we see this even from animal life to ours. Like we came from higher hominids and the apes who are hairy and, much more animalistic. And we've begun to lose our body hair. And we see that ETs typically have no hair anywhere. And these kind of animalistic features kind of evolve themselves out as the intelligence continues to evolve. So maybe 100,000 years from now, our bodies will look very different than they do now.
I see. Amazing. Aaron, thank you so much. And we put your website. Please do connect with Aaron, and you can also catch up with him on the website at higherselfexpo.com to learn more about any of our speakers and to connect with them. Thank you, Aaron. Have an amazing week, and we hope to have you back again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.